Hey Exiles, it's Purifying here. This is my starter guide for my Purifying Flame, Holy Flame Totem Inquisitor. This is something that a lot of people have asked me about in regards to the Shockwave Totem build that I put up on the PoE Reddit, or Builds Reddit, I guess. I was pleasantly surprised the number of people who are interested in playing that Shockwave Totem build. And, a lot of people, the number one question that I get is, what do I do to start this build? How do I start this build? What's the best way to start this build? And, I always say the same thing. I say, well, start with Purifying Flame and Holy Flame Totem. And I've got a lot of requests over the years to have some sort of build guide, have some sort of, at least rough outline of what that looks like. And I've never done it, and so I thought I'd finally take the time to codify some of this information so anybody who wants to play this in the future can. I'm not going to come out and tell you this is the greatest starter of all time, that, you expect a meta shift in the next 10 minutes, that this thing's going to change the world. It's not, but it is like, what I like to play, how I like to play, how I like to start characters. It has a lot of nice things about it, particularly the fact that it has really nice DPS for the campaign. It allows you to do a very simple character for the campaign in early acts. You're going to see we life tap everything, so you don't have to worry about mana flasks. It doesn't have a lot of gearing needs. It doesn't need a lot of uniques. It's the kind of build you can play in SSF. You can play in SSF Hardcore. It's just sort of an all-purpose, all-arounder, safe build. And that's really what I like to play. I like to play something tanky and safe that allows me to progress my map, to make some currency, and then, really what this build does is kind of set you up for transferring into something better. You could play Purifying Flame all the way through Uber Bosses. I'll talk a little bit about how to keep the Purifying Flame side of things going, but mostly this is a build I've used to play something else different that you might not necessarily want to start. So let's go into actually what happens with the build. Start with my early tree here. So you can play this either as Inquisitor or Chieftain. If you play it as Chieftain, then you kind of start over here, of course, and you want to make this connection up here, but you can kind of run these points first. I will say if you do start as Chieftain, you don't get Purifying Flame in the beginning. So the one or two things that you have to do: one, go get Purifying Flame by just running an Inquisitor through Hillock. And two, I recommend staying slams all the way up until you hit level 16. But for the most part, I'm going to try and focus on Inquisitor for this. Although, like I said, Chieftain, pretty good starter too. When you're starting as Inquisitor, it's really nice because these nodes here give you physical damage. Both of the spells that we're going to use for campaign, Purifying Flame and Holy Flame Totem, are both physical spells. So all this is giving you damage. You're getting damage over here. This burst of damage at the start of the tree really sets you up nicely to not have to worry about your DPS for most of the time that you're playing through the campaign. You do want to grab this Determination Mastery right here, because that's going to set you up nicely for your next act in your auras. Around the time that you hit level, this should look like this, sorry, like that. Around the time you hit level 16, you can pick up Herald of Purity and Herald of Ash. This is when I switch as a Chieftain, but when I just, keep moving as an Inquisitor. Although I'm going to say, the way I like to play this, I drop Herald of Purity pretty quickly afterwards. And that's because I pick up these nodes here, and I run Purity of Elements, Determination, and Herald of Ash. Herald of Ash is great because it double dips. It gives you both Fizz as fire and extra fire spell damage, which helps both Holy Flame Totem and Purifying Flame. Purity of Elements basically wipes out most of your concerns about resistance capping during the acts, makes it really easy, and Determination just gives you that extra layer of benefit from having some more armor. When you hit around level 34, whatever you like to do it, you'll get your first Ascendancy point. I like to go the top side first. I pick up Sanctuary and then eventually Pious Path. These are really nice, good defensive nodes, but when you're playing Purifying Flame, you see Sanctuary gives 15% increased damage. Early on, this is basically a 15% more damage multiplier. So this is a really nice node right now. Anytime you hit something more than once, you're going to get this effect. Pretty cool. Helps with Holy Flame Totem too. So because Holy Flame Totem produces consecrated ground. So this is a really strong early DPS node. You'll notice that I take Elemental Overload instead of going crit. And some people might say, well, you're an Inquisitor. Aren't you supposed to be crit? And yeah, eventually you're definitely going to go Critical Strike with almost any Inquisitor build. But at the start of things, it's pretty rare when you have enough crit to support the build. You'll see this has 37.35% crit chance, but that's really only because there's a bunch of late stage items included here. Normally your crit chance is very low at this point, even if you go bottom side first. And I think you're better off just going Elemental Overload to start. You'll spec out of this later and move into something different. Then I move over here to Mental Rapidity. This is nice, increased cast speed. You can take Intensify Mastery, because Purifying Flame does benefit from Intensify, but I usually don't grab Intensify until later. And I'll talk more about gem links in just a second. So moving through the tree, as you develop your character, this is a level 64 character. You know, like I said, of course, I'm going to take Pious Path next. If you're already doing your third act by the time you're like late 60s, mid 60s, you want to go ahead and take Righteous Providence and eventually Inevitable Judgment. We'll talk about those more in just a second. But I do kind of round out the tree over here. These are very strong nodes. They give you access to some of this stuff. And then I typically move south. And I'll say that these nodes here are super nice defensively, particularly early on in the league, when you don't have a lot of access to easy defenses, and particularly with spell suppression gone. But a lot of what I use this build for is actually switching to a different playstyle later, and a lot of these points I end up dropping in many of my different builds. And I mention this because some people don't like using regrets, don't like buying regrets. If you're that kind of person, my suggestion is you develop more of this side of the tree. If you're going to play Shockwave Totems, if you have other builds in mind, obviously sort of develop where you plan on playing those builds. If you don't mind spending regrets like me, this is a good place to put them. Still here in Elemental Overload, I play that all the way through the campaign typically. I usually don't get my third act until either right before or right after Katava. But if you do happen to grab it, sometimes it's beneficial to go ahead and switch to crit. Most of the time, it's not really, you don't really have the multiplier yet to support it, and Elemental Overload's probably a net draw. You know what I mean? Like, it's not going to give you that much advantage. I have grabbed one crit node here because, you know, more crit chance does help keep Elemental Overload up. I'm going to show you, essentially this was the tree. I had about 3 to 5 days, I would say, into 3.17. This is actually my 3.17 starter and my 3.18 starter. I did switch a few things down here. 3.17, I took some of these points here. Vitality, or Hardy node, rather, super strong, so you can go this way as well. You can also connect from this point over to here, particularly through these nodes and through Determination, or, Juggernaut. But right now, I kind of like going this direction a little bit more. But this is sort of where you might end up at level 90, just in case you want to keep playing Purifying Flame, just in case, you know, you're having problems developing the currency to sort of switch to one of the other builds. I want to briefly talk about how you would keep playing Purifying Flame past a certain point, and then I'll kind of go into more about what you do to switch out of this and some of the gem links and stuff like that. If you're going to keep playing Purifying Flame, or if you're just looking to get a stronger character, these Grand Spectrum Jewels have always been incredibly strong. They're usually pretty cheap at league start. You can grab 3 of them for usually maybe 5C. Each one of them grants you 25% increased critical strike chance per jewel. So if you have all 3, each one of them is actually 75% increased critical strike chance, which is pretty darn awesome. So, very strong. A couple of other good uniques. Circle of Anguish, I think most people are familiar with this. The Tactician, this is a pretty good cheap belt. It benefits you in lots of different ways as an Inquisitor. Light of Lunaris has a bunch of energy shield on it and also has a really nice strong shield. All of these things are less than 10C typically in day 2, day 3. You know, league over league this can change. But for the most part, you should be able to grab like a 1 good effect Circle of Anguish, or, you know, and both of these items here to keep you rolling. During the acts, my suggestion is not to go out and function or fuss or worry about which uniques you need. Don't stop to go buy stuff, just keep rolling. You really don't need to spend a lot of time upgrading this character in Axe. Whatever you find on the ground should be enough, particularly if you get even a little bit lucky and find 2+1 spell skills or fire skills or physical skills, as you're going to be using a fire and physical gems. If you can find double wands with +1 on them, you're going to be in great shape. Really what you should be focusing on is some of these cheap uniques and a 6-link, because that's going to help you basically no matter what you're doing. The Tactician is really nice for almost any Inquisitor build for that matter that uses physical damage or physical converted damage, and Light of Lunaris is as well. So this is another good one, although if you're going Totems, you're going to want to Shaper Shield pretty fast. But 6 Link's probably your first bet, and then some of these other guys as you move forward. Now, what about our gym links when we're starting? This is sort of the other thing that people like to know about typically. I just want to point out, this is my first build guide I've done, so it might be a little disjointed, and I apologize for that. And also, I'm sort of tuning this towards like players who have some experience, and for anyone who's super casual or new to the game. If some of this stuff doesn't make sense to you, leave me a note, and I'm happy to talk about it. Or just tell me this is bad, and I'm happy to try and make it better. But gym links. Act 1, you're going to run 2 3 links, Purifying Flame, Onslaught, and Life Tap, as well as Holy Flame, Life Tap, and Added Fire or Combustion, depending on what you can get for links. Now, the fact that what makes this build click, especially in Acts, is the fact that you're basically able to use 2 4 links that have the exact same set of synergy. Purifying Flame and Holy Flame Totem are basically the same skill, but one's a totem and one's not. Which means that you're able to scale both of them more or less through using all the same stuff. That's pretty nice. That basically gives you like a 1.5 fold of your DPS. Holy Flame Totem kind of sucks on its own. As an adjuvant to Purifying Flame, it's pretty solid though. I like to keep Onslaught and Life Tap on Purifying Flame because it makes you faster and you don't have to worry about mana. I Life Tap almost everything in this build. And then I run 2 or 3 Quicksilver Flasks, depending on how twinked out the character is, and 2 Life Flasks. And I'll run that all the way up until usually Act 10, and then I'll put on an Onslaught Flask and switch some of these things out. But really during Acts, what you want to do is move fast. And this helps you move fast, and this helps you not worry about mana. You should have plenty of life to kill bosses with 3 Life Flasks. Just make sure you're keeping up relatively decent ones. You can also include Life Leech. You have to grab it from the library or in Act 6. You won't have as much DPS if you do things that way. You will have enough to kill stuff for sure. The Life Leech version of things is pretty nice, actually. It's very safe, but, maybe you want more DPS. So then this 4th link, whatever, ends up being something else. So down here I have a note that you can add either combustion or added fire damage, and then you want to add added fire damage, or usually faster casting, actually. This isn't the highest DPS gym, but it is really nice for just getting through acts, being able to cast faster, killing packs faster, etc. Act 2, you want to grab your Heralds and Blood Rage. Act 3, Determination and Purity of Elements. You'll drop Herald of Purity and pick up Flammability. Some people might say, I don't want all these defensive auras. That's cool. Don't use them. You can run Anger and Zealotry and get a bunch of offense and, do things that way. I don't think that's better. I actually think your DPS is going to be functionally higher if you have enough tankability to just hold right click. And I'm telling you that if you upgrade your gear even a little bit and have these 2 auras on during the acts, you'll be tanky enough to mostly just hold right click. It's not that. It's pretty simple. You can't stand in everything, but you can stand in a lot of things, which is, so that's the reason why I do this. It just makes things simple. I also hate dying. Some people don't care. I don't really like it. And you lose experience, makes you feel bad, so I try not to. Act 4, Chaos Golem's nice for leveling, not required. Act 6, you want to finish out some of these things. You can fit Defiance Banner at some point. You want to start leveling Assassin's Mark typically. And then Wave of Conviction's useful until you get Inevitable Judgment. And I will say that this is an absolutely fantastic point. With the changes to Arch Nemesis, pinning or penetrating all of an enemy's elemental resistances becomes more and more valuable because they have more resistance now. So Inevitable Judgment's one of the reasons why Inquisitor is just dope as hell right now. It is super strong, super fun to play. The other reason, of course, being this massive regeneration that you get. I mean, this character is barely even out of the gates, and you're already looking at 1,700 life regen and 900 life leech. Pretty nice. That will provide you a lot of durability. I think regeneration is probably a little underrated right now in the community. You can save yourself a lot of deaths, particularly while mapping, by just having really strong regeneration. So what a lot of people care about, of course, is not necessarily how I play this build, this Purifying Flame build, but rather how do I switch this build into something more interesting. And alongside this, I'm going to post my 3.19 potential Uber killers. And I'm going to do it with a huge caveat that they're fairly untested, and I absolutely do not promise that they're going to kill Uber bosses. I have a couple of ideas of things that I think will be fun to run. I have a Exsanguinate Chieftain build that's going to be my starter. I'll probably play that build as Purifying Flame all the way till level 75-ish, believe it or not. And the reason why is Exsanguinate's base damage is kind of crappy. And so, it doesn't really start to pop off until you get some good increases to it. So once you get those good increases, though, it gets really fantastic clear. Really fantastic, beautiful clear. I have a little video I made that's like, kind of half-ass gear that's still pretty darn strong. Like ripping through maps. It was pretty fun to play, so I'm excited to start at this league. But how do I start? How do I make the shift to Shockwave Totems? How do I make the shift to other builds? Typically, what I will say specifically, I'm just going to talk specifically about Shockwave Totem rather than these other builds, because I think that's what a lot of people are sort of interested in. That's what this precipitating factor for me even doing this little deal was. If you want to start Shockwave Totem, one of the first things you're probably going to do is knock off these nodes and maybe even like all the way down to here. Or you might want to keep these if you're early on because they are nice survivability. And you're going to be short on mana res at first too. But as soon as you can, the first thing you want to probably grab is a Galesight Helm. I don't expect it to be as expensive this league. I've been known to be wrong before. I might be wrong again. That will allow you to brittle things. You can include that in this build quite nicely by simply going up here rather than to Avatar of Fire, getting some of that fizz converted to cold, and now all of a sudden your Galesight's brittling things with your Purifying Flame. You'll still pin everything because of Inevitable Judgment, and it's actually quite strong. The next thing you'll want to get, and really you can't play Shockwave Totems until you get this, is an Astral Projector Ring. I want to sort of jump over to a Shockwave Totem build real fast, and I'll post this POB. But I'm going to sort of jump over to a Shockwave Totem build real fast so I can talk about it more specifically. Actually, maybe I won't. Maybe my computer will be super duper slow and not want to do that. Here we go. Anyway, Shockwave Totem is a really cool skill. I love it. It's one of my favorite things in the game. Only when one condition's met, which is having Astral Projector. So you'll see Shockwave Totem here. It's a totem. You put it down. Normally it just pulses around itself and kind of sucks. It doesn't really accomplish much. You equip this ring here, Astral Projector. It projects that Nova onto other things. In projecting that Nova, you get a really nice area of effect, and you get a massive increase in your distance. This thing off-screen stuff like mad. That's one of the things that makes it great for mapping. Really strong skill, and I've really enjoyed playing it, and I've enjoyed the fact other people are interested in playing it. So Galesight and Astral Projector are your first two things you really want to grab. After that, it's good to start grabbing some things like this offhand ring. You really want a ring with some cast speed and dexterity because you're going to be lagging on dexterity for most of the time you have this build. The next thing you probably want to look at grabbing is a Skin of the Lords. Super strong chest. And that's going to give you a big DPS bump. You can get some good keystones. Things like Call to Arms is really nice because you can put Enduring Cry on left click and give yourself another source of regen, as well as potentially some endurance charges. After that, these jewels, which typically I go Ironbreaker, Battle Hardened, and Furious Assault or Force Multiplier. They're both pretty good. You want at least one Force Multiplier, maybe two Force Multipliers, because that double damage increases your ailment effect. You want to develop these next because these clusters are much stronger than most of the things you'll get on the tree, as well as they give you jewel space that you're going to need to finish out the build. Melding, I have no idea how much melding is going to cost this league. It now has 2 affixes, and Divine Orbs are going to be really expensive, so it may or may not be something reasonable to grab. You might have better luck, like even going with a Brass Dome, going with a Sappho's Frame, maybe even grabbing these points down here. I don't really know what the best way to do things is going to be, and I'll just tell you, I plan on playing Shockwave Totems at some point this league, but I plan on doing it as a chieftain with a very different build that I've sort of moneyballed into what I think will be close to this build that I put up in 3.17 and 8. So we'll see what happens. Anyway, I'll post it. People can play that instead, or you can just continue to play Inquisitor Shockwave Totems. There's a dude named Firstborn TV who has a guide up on the forums. It's perfectly fine. Follow his guide. Follow him. He seems like a decent enough dude. And that's another route you can go to. Anyway, as you continue to develop the character, these Forbidden Flesh and Flame jewels are extremely powerful. You'd like to get a Watcher's Eye that looks like this one. This is a pretty good Watcher's Eye, and all this stuff is in that 3.18 thread. And then, finally you sort of round out some of the other things, like your amulet. If you could afford ashes, that's awesome. If not, that's fine. You can continuously upgrade your shield. You really want max 1, +1 max totems. You really want max res. Depending on how things turn out with melding costs this league, if it becomes a 40x item for a well-rolled melding, and I don't think that's going to happen, but if it does, then I would probably abandon it unless you're like a pretty serious player. The last thing I typically grab is Nebulous, which may or may not even be good this league, depending on how much max res you can get. This is sort of dependent upon having melding. Melding kind of gatekeeps access to Nebulous, although there's some pretty good cheap weapons you can use in the interim. So anyway, that's sort of my guide to how I start things, and a little guide to how you might want to start segueing things. If people have questions about this, then I'm happy to answer them as always. And if you have comments about this, if I talk too fast, if this is just totally uninformative garbage, just let me know. I'm happy to make changes. I'm happy to adjust to things. I can put out better guides in the future, and if you help me, then I will appreciate it. Anything I can do to get better at this stuff and help the community, I'm happy to have criticism. So with that being said, I hope everyone gets a chance to play this little starter build. Have a look at those PoBs for some of these other things, and I guess I'll see you all in raid class.